Call a meeting to order. The first thing is to modify the agenda. I'm trying to think if I don't see Dan here. Dan asked for some time. We'll put it during new business at the end if we have time. If not, it'll be an agenda item for next time. Dan asked me if he could have 3 or 4 minutes to speak from Windham County about an issue, so.
Well, here they are right now.
So I just want to let him know that Dan, we'll get you your couple minutes at the end of the meeting if we have time. If not, it'll be an agenda item for next time. All right.
Get your packets out on the
On the table. That's the only modification of the agenda that I know of at this time. So we have a couple new faces with us tonight that I'd like to introduce to the board, and maybe it's just as easy if we introduce them, but then we run around and everybody introduce themselves so that they know who we are. So we'll start with Gaston, is it?
Right.
From
North Country Supervisor.
North Country Supervisory Union. It's what, Essex, Orleans? What's the county the area?
Orleans and the Northern Essex region.
Northern Essex and Orleans.
Kathy Nolan is the counterpart.
Yes.
Amy LaRue had filled the seat and decided not to run again. And we reached out several times to folks from Orleans Central, which is the other SU in that region, and they weren't unable to identify anybody interested. And Gaston was willing to serve, so we're lucky to have him here tonight.
He's on the agenda to actually appoint him later on Article 8 or Item 8, and Mark Lamoille North is new with us tonight. So we'll start with Lou and just run around and tell what region you're from and where you represent. We'll run around the room and what your job is.
Let's see you run, Lou.
Well, I use the term loosely. He was running and, never mind.
So my name is Lou Bushy. I represent Southern Caledonia County and Southern Essex County.
Not easy, is
Not
it?
anymore. I don't know about that one. But.
Yeah, I'm Celeste Guerrero. I live in Sutton and I represent the Caledonia and Southern Essex region. I have to read it because
I'm Sue Siglowski. I work for the VSBA. I'm the Director of Legal and Policy Services.
I'm Jim Salzgiver, from Bennington County. I'm with the Deconic and Green Board and Bennington Rutland Supervisory Union.
I'm Sarah McLean. I'm an Addison representative, and I'm on the MAUSD school board.
I'm Mark Young.
Diane Gerson-Blitman from Jericho, Chittenden, Grand Isle, Mount Mansfield, 525.
Amy McMullen from the Windsor region. Kim Gleason from Essex Westford School District, and Chittenden Grand Isle representative and treasurer of this fine organization.
Neil O'Dell from Northern Vermont, the other Windsor area representative, and also serve on the Dresden Interstate School Board with Hanover, New Hampshire.
So, Gas Pathlon, I'm on the Troy School Board as chair of that board, and also part of the North Country Supervisory Union as I was suggesting.
Thank you for being here.
I'm Christina Naylor. I'm chair of the Dummerston Board. I'm a Windham County representative, so Brattleboro area, and I'm on the Windham Southeast Supervisory Union.
I'm Lori Childers. I'm Addison County rep, and I'm on the Addison Northwest Supervisory School District Board.
I'm Don Collins. I'm one of the Franklin County reps for this board, and I'm on the Swan Elementary School Board and the Westchester Valley Union High School Board, and I don't know what the next board will be, but they're working on it.
Dan MacArthur from the Marlborough School Board, the other Windham Region representative.
I'm Susan Holson, Director of Education Services here at VSBA.
I'm Jeff Francis, the Executive Director of the Superintendent's Association.
Jay Nichols, Executive Director of the Vermont Principals Association.
They don't come to all our meetings. They're special guests here this evening.
We were told steak. I'm not sure if that's true.
Yeah, Nicole Mace from the Executive Director of VSBA.
Clarence Haynes, President of VSBA from Middletown Springs, Vermont, Rutland County. So without further ado, we will let Nicole introduce our program tonight with the two executive directors, if she would like, please.
Thank you. May I make a couple of just
Certainly.
announcements related to Carrie and Harry Frank, who's a former employee of the VSBA. So Carrie, I mentioned to all of you, was in the hospital last week. She is home from the hospital. She is getting better. The antibiotics are working, which is a great thing. But expect that she'll be at home for a few more days. So we cobbled tonight's meeting together without her able assistance. It's the first quarter treasurer's report is not being discussed tonight. Normally it would at the December meeting, but I don't have the ability to get into Carrie's QuickBooks and produce reports, etc. So we'll take that up in January when she's back.
Just recently, she and I discussed the October end of month reports, so I'm feeling really confident that we're still in good shape.
We're in good shape, and so Kim still gets monthly reports, but Carrie again has been out for almost 2 weeks at this point. So. And then the other update I just wanted to share with folks, Harry Frank, who was our Director of Board Education Services for many years. His wife is in hospice at the moment, and she's had stage 4 cancer for quite a while. She was in remission, but it came back, and so we've sent some good wishes onto their family, but wanted to just share his information if anybody wanted to reach out to support him and his family.
A lot of board members here attended trainings where Harry was involved and trained us, a lot of us, so he was a lot of involvement.
Cool.
Yeah. Okay, so I am pleased to welcome Jay Nichols and Jeff Francis to join us for this discussion. Our three organizations, in addition to the Council of Special Education Administrators, who also have an office in this building, have been working collaboratively on issues related to a lot of issues, but in particularly focusing on implementation of Act 166, Vermont's universal pre-kindergarten law. And so in a little bit, we're going to share with you the approach that we're taking to the upcoming legislative session, specifically related to pre-K. But before we get to that, I wanted to share with you some updates on some of the broader systems work that's been going on with respect to early care and education. So for those of you who've been on the board for a few months, you know that the VSBA had a seat and was participating in the Building Bright Futures think tank work, which began over the summer. There were 4 meetings of a group of 20 or so representatives, which are listed on page 7 of that report. The large majority of the membership on the think tank were representatives of the early care community. There were a few representatives from the K-12 system. Amy Fowler, who is no longer at the Agency of Education, so she actually missed the last meeting. Becca Ballant sits on the Education Committee in the Senate, but she was unable to participate in most meetings. David Young, who's the superintendent in South Burlington, he was unable to participate in most meetings. Jeff and myself and somebody from the North Country, Diane Nichols Fleming from the North Country Supervisory Unit. So the process that the think tank used was challenging really from the outset, in that we were divided into 3 different groups, focusing on 3 different areas, and subject matter expertise wasn't necessarily universal. And so some of the groups were developing ideas pretty much in a vacuum, and also lacking some of the content knowledge that you might hope for when you're building policy recommendations of this nature. So my own participation was limited in the process by they scheduled several meetings in conflict with state board meetings. So I would go to sort of a half a day, try to participate, try to contribute, and then leave and come back. And there's a host of recommendations, and I'm not quite clear where they came from, and some of them don't make a lot of sense. For example, one was we need to create a new agency in state government to oversee early care and education, and we need a new early education fund. So the upshot is, Jeff and I in particular were probably the most constant, at least statewide policy representatives to participate in the process, worked pretty hard to influence the process, and at the end of the day felt we were really unable to do so. I believe that the recommendations that come out of this report are inconsistent with the goals that this organization has established for public investments in early care and education. And that is, first and foremost, that we need to assure that there's equity in access. We need to assure that there's equity in terms of quality of programs, and that the same expectations in terms of economies of scale and efficiency that are being placed upon the K-12 system are placed on the early care system. It isn't a system. There is no system. And these recommendations don't do anything, in my view, to move us towards a system. There's a lot of additive recommendations without taking a real hard look at how would we redesign this system to ensure that that we're delivering public investment in a way that is high quality, resulting in high quality opportunities for all kids. So I have asked to have, and I think you'll see in this copy, my name is not on this report. Actually, it is. Is it on this?
No, it's not.
No.
In there.
So that was a mistake. And I read the report and said, I noticed you left my name off. Maybe we should just keep it that way. So, Jeff and I had a subsequent meeting with the executive director of the Building Bright Futures, Sarah Squirrel, who has since accepted a position as commissioner of the Department of Mental Health, so she's no longer going to be there. Sarah, I believe, really has done more, in my view, in the last, I don't know how long she was with BBF, 2 years?
How long than that, but I'm not sure.
2 or 3 years, but done more outreach to the K-12 partners to bring us to the table and hear our perspectives than previous executive directors of the BBF, so I'm appreciative of that. And I think the way the report framed, I mean, you'll see if you've read it, it talks about, one person thought this, one person didn't like that. That's me. And in many instances, it is me. Sometimes it's me and one or two other people. And I did not feel as though it adequately represented the concerns that I tried to bring to the table, but also the breadth of it's not just one. I don't represent one person. We represent a lot of organizations that have been, Jay's organization didn't have a seat at the table. Many of the other education associations didn't have a seat at the table. So I feel like there is a fundamental philosophical, I don't want to say divide, because I think that, but disagreement about how to approach public investment in early care and learning. And on the one side of the table are private providers who, on the one, have a business interest and are trying to make their businesses work in a model that really doesn't work. The financing doesn't really work. And a belief also from the agencies, the Agency of Human Services, that families know what's best for their child, and so the public resources have to be put into the hands of families in order to make choices, which rather than into a public system, frankly. And so there's some real challenges associated with reconciling those points of view. And this process, I think, missed an opportunity to put those on the table and really hammer it out. And so when we talk about hundreds of millions of additional dollars in public investment, what do we mean by that? And where does that investment go? And who is accountable for ensuring that that investment is being well spent and delivered in high quality settings that are accessible to all children? In the public school context, there's a very clear accountability framework, and I'm not necessarily of the mind that we need to replicate that framework in the early years, but there needs to be some framework and some way to assure that public dollars are translating into increased capacity, particularly in rural communities where we're seeing centers and home providers go out of business. And so there really was no space to sort through those points of friction. And as a result, I think we have a report that that misses the mark in terms of some of the changes that could be made in order to improve the system, turn it into a system, and that's why I asked that we not be included as among the authors of the recommendations. I didn't feel like the minority sections of the report adequately reflect the magnitude of the difference that's out there in terms of how we approach this work. Jeff, do you have, and I don't want to put you on the spot, but do you have anything to add based on your experience in that process?
Well, your characterization of what transpired and didn't transpire is accurate. I think that if you take a look at the approach that's taken to public policy and early care, early learning, and early education, and I think there's a distinction between the latter two, there's a lot of reports produced and process associated with a direction that doesn't really do justice to the public policy analysis or what we're doing with resources. And Nicole made a decision to ask to have her name removed from the report. I didn't reach the same conclusion, although my thinking is aligned with her. I think that by the time the report gets vetted in a fair public policy arena, it could, the relevance of the report, I hope, is diminished because the problems are so profound. So I respect the fact that her name is off it. I'm still grappling whether I would make the same request. The whole thing's complicated by the fact that Sarah Squirrel, who was the Building Bright Futures executive director, is now gone. For those of you who understand anything about the Agency of Human Services, know that it's a huge, it's an enterprise that sort of in the Vermont context would rival any huge bureaucracy, the biggest. And you know, what we're trying to do, and Nicole will talk about this, and then Jay and I will add to it, is we're trying to figure out a way to cut through all that to get good value for taxpayer dollars that are intended for education. And that, we're gonna talk a little bit about that.
So I'll just call out one of the recommendations because I believe of anything in here, it's the one that may have some legs, and that is recommendation number 5, redesign childcare financial assistance. So much of the state's support for early care comes through the child care financial assistance subsidy.
Excuse me, Nicole, I'm sorry, where are you?
I'm on page 30 of the report. It's got this bar chart.
Yep.
And so the think tank had a fiscal analyst on it who helped do some numbers here, run some numbers here around redesigning the subsidy in order to essentially eliminate the cliff that you see here in this chart. So that cliff represents the difference between if you earn a certain amount of money, you're less eligible for certain public benefits, right? And so the apparent consensus of the group was we need to be very worried about families making between $40,000 and $70,000 a year, because the people at the low end of the spectrum have access to more resources. And so the question that I ask is, well, just because you're eligible for a subsidy doesn't mean that you're actually getting the subsidy. It doesn't mean that you actually have access to childcare. So before we start redistributing state resources away from low-income families or smoothing out the curve to make sure higher-income families have access to state funds, maybe we ought to analyze who that is eligible for subsidy is actually accessing it and has access to quality care. I didn't get, like, oh, good questions. We don't have time to look at that. But I have since heard that folks, advocates who work in this arena are planning to come to the legislature with a big request this year to fund this redesigned subsidy program. And numbers I've heard are in the range of $40 to $50 million. So I raise that because it's the kind of thinking that I find incredibly problematic, that we are ignoring, I believe, the real dire straits that exist for families living in poverty, families living in rural parts of the state that do not have access to high quality childcare settings. 10 hours a week of publicly funded pre-K does not do anything to meet your need if you cannot afford the additional number of hours or you can't find a spot. So to me, to be talking about $40–50 million of additional public investment without taking the time to understand, first and foremost, how are we meeting the needs of the most at-risk children? Because we know if we do not meet their needs in the early years, we pay as collectively, and it's not just a financial, price we pay. It's a human price, and so it's that. That to me is the best illustration of part of the problem, and I question whether if the emphasis is on building the capacity within the system that doesn't exist as a system to meet needs, using public dollars, is delivering that resource through a subsidy, through a voucher, the right way to do it. Because I think you need to have both. I think you need to make sure that families can afford and have access to financial assistance to afford. And I think you need to invest public dollars in capacity building, and that does not happen when you have families in charge of where the resources go. Anybody have any questions about the think tank report?
The money to pay for this that they're coming to look at it, are they just talking about diverting money from the ed fund to pay for this?
So this report was very careful, and that's one thing I am appreciative of, not to go to the ed fund for money. So there are some suggested funding streams at some point in here. If I think a marijuana tax, some new
Internet
tax. They're looking at a new tax, which the governor has been very clear he won't support. He doesn't have the legislature can, if they want to, override a veto at this point. So, but I'm not sure the legislature has appetite for a new tax. So then we can, if people don't have questions about the think tank report, then we can get into the December 1 letter and those implications.
So not knowing whether or not the legislature will take this up or lean on this as data, do we know what to anticipate for action if we need to call on board members, or what this organization would be asked to consider?
So I think we're gonna get into sort of our general approach to this session. And I think we're gonna take a more proactive approach, but we'll get to that.
Nicole, I've scanned this a couple of times, but I couldn't find that there was discussion about the lack of access. I don't know about the rest of the state, but I know in our area when we're working on legislation and in contact with child care providers, many of them have gone out of business. So we have fewer people now. So if we had $200 million, probably isn't going to make a whole lot of difference, because there's no place for these children to go.
So there's been, they did not talk about access. There are other studies, on access. But to me, it's another limitation of the process. Well, first of all, if there's only so much you can do in 4 meetings. So.
I guess I just say, in my mind, is something has to be addressed, because just more money isn't going to do it if we've had places closed. And I don't know, but I'd say at least 10% of the people that were doing it in Franklin County 5 years ago are gone now.
I don't know how you want to run this, because so that's a really good point. Here's one way to look at it is this. We've had a challenge in this state with early care, time immemorial. The whole issue about availability, accessibility, cost, and so on and so forth has been with us chronically as a state, since I've been paying attention, and that's a fairly long time. Educators and early care providers seized on the notion of universal access for early education, because in education, we recognize that early education is among the better, if not the best strategies to get kids into a learning pattern with supports that gives them what they need educationally. But when Act 166 passed, there was confusion, I believe, under how the resource would support the entire endeavor. So one school of thought, which was the school of thought from educators, was that we were going to get access to early education. That came from the Agency of Education, the public school systems, and people that were thinking about it from an education perspective. The early care side of the equation, read AHS, I think looked at the ed fund in certain ways as an infinite source of money to be able to shore up a system that had not benefited from the public resources that was necessary to sustain it in a way that we would want to sustain it. So the problems that we're going to talk about a little bit more that evolved from that had to do with, I think, confusion over the purpose of the act, the cultures of AOE versus AHS, the cultures of early care and learning as compared to pre-K education, that have brought us to a point where there's a large amount of energy in terms of advocacy for the whole thing, but there's an interest in making sure that the education side of the equation is used, I would say, in ways that weren't contemplated from the public policy perspective when the law passed. So we will continue to have in this state issues around supply in a opportunity in a system that is really stretched from, you know, home-based providers, which have been with us historically, all the way to the public schools. And it's a, you know, it's a complicated dynamic that we're trying to do justice to in terms of our explanation from the education perspective, what's working, what's not working, maybe what could be done about it.
Right, but so before we get to that.
You had another question too.
Yeah, Jim had a question.
You know, part of it was tying into something Don said, but you know, to me, you know, actually what Jeff just said addresses part of it. I was looking at, you know, this is, you know, they're talking about building an administrative structure to support this all, to create a system. And in a lot of ways, they're talking about building an administrative structure without talking at all about the existing administrative structure that supports education. Yeah, the concern when you start bringing that, shouldn't it really be a parallel, an adjunct to build on, something like that? Of course, then they decide to take all the money from the ed fund if you do that.
But they don't want us to oversee it.
But it, you know, it seems like, you know, you're going to build another, you know, they're talking about spending a bunch of money to build another administrative structure to do kind of what a lot of SUs are already pretty much doing. And that is sort of illogical. I was just curious whether that really got into the whole discussion or, you know, or not.
There really wasn't sufficient time. I think the early care and learning hub concept that, you know, has some promise, but again, we couldn't get to the details around who's, you know, what authority do these hubs have? Why wouldn't we just use supervisory unions? Supervisory unions are not going to be subjected to another layer of governance and oversight through these early care hubs, you know. So the problem is there's more unanswered questions, and these recommendations do not get at the core fundamental issues that this organization has identified. So I'm going to transition now to the...
I just wanted to say also, you know, on Don's point that, you know, people are disappearing, providers are disappearing, and that's more on the care side, but they, you know, some education, but they're disappearing, I think, for reasons that this strategy is doubling down on.
Will exasperate.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think we agree with that.
So, you have, not as part of your packet, because I just finished it today, I needed a lot of time to think about how to respond to the December 1 letter and how to connect it to part of this conversation. And the reason it's connected to this conversation is for those of you who read the letter. If you haven't read the letter, the good news is we're expecting level tax rates this year because of growth in the grand list and increases in revenue to the education fund. Changes were made last year to the ed fund, so the general fund transfer was eliminated, and now we collect 100. Ed fund we don't. Ed fund collects 100% of the sales and use tax. Because of a Supreme Court decision, the state can collect sales tax from online sales, which has resulted in more revenue. That was not unexpected. folks in the legislature knew that that case was coming and it was likely to have the result that it had. The administration's letter proposes to allocate, so we eliminated the general fund transfer to the ed fund in order to, and the General Assembly's purpose in doing so was to prevent the type of finger pointing that was happening between, pressures on the general fund were leading to all sorts of political games around, how much we can afford education. And so by sort of severing that length, supposedly, the ed fund becomes more self-sustaining. Well, now there's more revenue coming into the ed fund. So the administration's proposal is essentially, it's not clear where they're proposing to put the $6.6 million, but they want to put that into early care and learning. And so this article really is an attempt to make sure people are clear about that. Make sure that people are clear about the VSBA's position relative to early education and expansion of public dollars into our early care and education system. So if the proposal, and it's not clear, but if the proposal is to take money out of the ed fund and back to the general fund into programs that do not have direct oversight through public school boards, that is something we oppose as an organization. We have a resolution against that. We also have a resolution specific to pre-kindergarten that says that system must assure quality and equity, and that school districts should play a central role in assuring accountability in publicly funded programs. So that then leads to our call for substantial reforms to Act 166. So I'm trying to connect a lot of dots for people in that. To the extent we have new money available, whether it's through a new broad-based tax or because there's a windfall in the ed fund, we ought to be very, very careful and thoughtful about where those public dollars are being invested and how, so that we can ensure both that there's public accountability for those dollars and that they're being used to support equitable access to high quality education. So I think with that as
There were a
a
shortfall, do you think they'd plan on making it up for us?
right. So, the tax commissioner's letter goes on to say, if school boards just budget the way they did last year, we could have even more money to put into the early care and education system, which is, it doesn't make a heck of a lot of sense to me that they would frame it that way, because I don't know why there would be an incentive to cut your budget so that you could hand the money over to somebody else, particularly if you have no oversight or control. But so these are our fancy new TVs. I don't know if you guys noticed them last month, but so I can now project from my screen, and what we're going to do is transition into a process that we've undertaken to identify problems associated with Act 166 implementation. We can talk to you about who we've met with, who we've talked to so far, and what our current thinking is as we plan for the upcoming legislative session. Jeff, do you want to say anything about the process that was undertaken to get here?
The list that you're going to see is really 4 years in the making. Act 166 passed in 2014. After the first full year of implementation, I surveyed superintendents and asked them their impressions of the implementation of the law. The superintendents across the state identified an array of issues that I testified on before the General Assembly on February 25th, 2016. And basically, I said to the General Assembly that there was still time to get the law right, and that the more you miss, the more years that go by missing the mark, the further from the mark you find yourself. That testimony was largely supported by the organizations that are represented here, VSBA, VPA, and not with us, but VCSEA. We're all sort of saying the same thing. And we encountered immediately pushback from the early learning advocacy groups and the Agency of Human Services. They said, we need more time. There's no data to back this up. We maybe needed more time. I didn't have data, but I had impressions from superintendents who were trying to work to implement the law. So roll the clock forward. This year, we think that the challenges are more significant. They're more easily identified. And we think we need a different approach because the approach that we've taken to try to get adjustments has not worked. So we started with a convening of the executive directors and staff of the organizations that I mentioned. We included folks that were trying to implement the law on the ground, and we had 2 or 3 folks that are early child education coordinators for school districts working with public-private partnerships trying to implement the law. And we collectively, and I would emphasize collectively, developed this list of problem statements that are intended to, in very plain language, set out what we see as problems. But we didn't rely on our translation from folks that we were hearing from in the field. We actually brought folks who were working in the field, principals, superintendents, early childhood staff, and we showed them the document that you're about to see. And we said, we realize that you all may not experience this, but if any of you experience this, then this is an issue. And we tested these problem statements and the explanations underlying them with that group. They actually gave us insights that we didn't have. So they said, not only is it a problem in the areas that you've cited, but it's a problem in this area as well. So that was the process that brought us this document. Nicola, Jay can talk about what then happened.
Well, I think maybe we should talk them through the document.
Okay.
So there are 5 problem statements. The first is one that, it's an issue we've discussed often around this board table, that under the current system, students with disabilities do not have equitable access. And that is because when you have a voucher system, some families, that means basically the state is the region where you can enroll your child. Supervisory unions and supervisory districts are not obligated to provide special education services to locations 50, 60 miles away. So if you're a family that lives in Montpelier and work in Burlington and you enroll your child in a center in Burlington, the Montpelier School District does not have the resources, nor is it obligated to provide special education services in that, EEE services in that setting. And so you immediately have this divide between students with disabilities actually have the choice of a much smaller range of settings than students without disabilities. The second problem statement
Sorry. Those B and C are also really, they're very important.
The 504 piece.
Oh, yeah.
is-
Thank
Oh,
you.
yeah.
Same thing, you guys all know what 504 is, right? So services for kids who are not on IEPs but still have some type of life function that they need support for. Nothing in this protects them at all. Same as special ed.
Same and
Same
ADA
special ed.
compliance
And the
also.
same thing with ADA compliance.
Something to keep in mind, and this will be a theme that runs throughout, the so-called tuition payment is the same to a public school as it is to a center-based provider, as it is to a family-based provider. So when you consider the inequity in the delivery model, keep in mind that the dollar value associated is the same across each of those entities.
So another aspect of equity has to do with, again, the flat tuition rate does not provide assurance of direct instructional contact time with licensed instructors. So the rules are different depending on the setting that you're in. If your child enrolls in a public pre-K program, then public schools are required to provide direct instruction by a licensed teacher at all times. If you're a private center, you have to have a teacher on site, but there's no instruction requirement, and that teacher needs to be on site for 10 hours, not necessarily the same 10 hours that some student, so if you have students that are enrolled to go on Thursdays and Fridays, but the licensed teacher is on site Mondays and Tuesdays, you may not have any contact with the licensed instructor. Home providers may only have 3 hours of weekly consultation by a licensed teacher. So in that setting, there's no licensed teacher on site at all. And yet, the tuition payment is the same. So the access in terms of, if you believe that licensure is a marker for quality, then arguably students are not having access to the same quality setting, depending on where they are able to find a slot. We still do not have a system in place for monitoring implementation, and that was noted by a national study. That's not our opinion on the matter. It was called out in a national study of Vermont's pre-K system. We've talked about the limitations of 10 hours a week. Access to those 10 hours is limited to families who can arrange for transportation or can afford to pay 4 hours beyond 10. Schools, some schools offer full day pre-K, but most cannot afford to do so because they're only, the ADM is limited to 0.46. And again, research suggests 10 hours is not nearly enough to support students in closing the achievement gap. So the purpose of the investment is actually missing the mark because it's insufficient in terms of time.
Actually, can we add to that?
Mm-hmm.
There's certainly anecdotal evidence that the current system we have is exacerbating the problem. Because the kids that need the service are less likely to get it than kids that don't need it. So we're actually increasing the gap for kids as they go into kindergarten in many cases.
And there are no requirements related to serving dual language learners in the private setting.
If I remember correctly, there was a prohibition about the money leaving the state. And there's a bunch of communities up and down the Connecticut River that there's bedroom community on one side of the state, everybody works on the other side.
Mm-hmm.
And that was one of the concerns that I know a lot of the Northeast Kingdom communities were complaining about, to the point where some people actually had to set up home-based systems just to take advantage of this. And I'm not sure it was all above board, but they made it do.
Yeah.
They made it work.
So that's another, when you think about choice.
The geography of it matters.
Yeah.
'Cause
Yeah. So the third problem statement relates to financial sustainability and overall affordability of the law that was intended to reduce costs. So when you have individual providers participating in this mixed delivery system themselves, not part of any larger structure that can support their work. The cost per child is much higher to serve 6 children or less than to serve a minimum group of 15 students. It's very difficult to forecast ahead of time who you're going to be serving and to plan ahead and to have even in the public school side, the ability to start a program and staff a program is limited by the fact that you don't know when whether a parent will be enrolling in that program or because they got a new job somewhere else, it's more convenient to go closer to where they work. And you guys can speak to this. I think there's a problem with, in the private setting, there's no sort of registration deadline. So people sort of come and go throughout the year, and it's very difficult for school districts that are responsible for the payment side of this equation to even manage that piece of it.
What about private ones that go up and beyond sometimes what the public is doing? And the STAR system, that's not a system that evaluates the preschool?
So you have to have 3 at least 3 stars in order to be
Right,
qualified. So you could be 3, 4, or 5.
right. What if you have privates that are 5?
So they are regulated under the CDD standards,
Okay.
but they are still not required to have licensed educators on site. That's not part of the STARS framework.
So there are privates though that go above and beyond that have licensed educators, that may even have a special educator on board.
Sure.
There, okay.
Sure, but it's uneven, and that's not
Correct.
required. Most Head Start program, this has been a fascinating aspect of this. Head Start programs do not charge families, but tuition relief, which is supposed to then go to families, is still being paid by school districts to Head Start programs. So it's a benefit that no other provider has access to in terms of not having to pass that on to families. So that ultimately means that Head Start programs have 3 layers of public tax dollars, federal, state, and local, which is unique to those programs. And that very well may be an outcome that people want, but it certainly wasn't a deliberate policy discussion. It was sort of accidental.
Is there any data to suggest that is allowing for expanded capacity within Head Start?
We haven't seen that data. There may be.
And oftentimes Head Starts go ahead.
No.
Oftentimes Head Starts will have a certain amount of space that they can have
Yeah.
in the place where they are, so oftentimes they're full. We know of a couple cases where Head Starts have actually have money sitting there that they don't know what to do with. It's because they've already been paid twice for the kid, for individual kids. They get federal money, they're also getting the tuition voucher from the school.
And I think that, it gets into the next point, which is if we are indeed in an environment of limited fiscal resources, then how are we ensuring that those resources are not being layered in places where, I'm sure everybody would love to have the resources, but that we're potentially missing the mark in terms of delivering those resources to ensure kids who don't have access are getting access. So we've asked for several years now, it's a standard talking point in my pre-K testimony for 3 years, we need data on access to the voucher by children living in poverty, who speaks more than one language, or English isn't their first language, have disabilities, are living in rural parts of the state. We don't have that data, so we cannot evaluate the system in a way that we can improve it. We have a lot of anecdote, and oftentimes the anecdotes are sort of competing. In this, in my experience, so Linda's point, there are also places where it's working really well. So it becomes very difficult to have a rational policy discussion around how are we really ensuring that this resource is being used effectively. Gaston, yeah.
So when these home-based and school-based young learners come together, kindergarten, right, I guess, is there a marked difference between the two groups? So do you see a difference in the preparation level of the home-based versus those that are coming directly from the school?
I don't know whether we've seen that data at the state level in terms of the kindergarten readiness. So there's a kindergarten readiness assessment that is administered. I've seen some, I think there's a report on the state of our young children or something that BBF put out that says more children are taking the kindergarten readiness assessment and doing better, but it's not disaggregated by which type of setting they're in.
Right. And you have schools, you mentioned private daycare providers that provide more. There are schools that have full-day programs, even though it's costing their local taxpayers money. You have other schools that have half-day programs but have very high attendance because they run buses for those half-day programs. So it's really hard to compare apples to apples.
Right, and then you have parents who decide too that they don't want to send their child
Right.
to, they think, oh, it's too much for my child to go full day versus half the day.
Right.
And they get upset about the fact of, especially kids on, let's say, IEPs, who may be a little bit slower, and they feel that the day is too much for them. So there's that, whole thing going on as well.
So I just think, I want to call just out, and that's, again, national report has said that there's a great degree of latitude in this program, which makes it very difficult to assess whether it is of high quality and it is effective. And finally, we've got joint agency administration of this law. So the Agency of Education and the Agency of Human Services are jointly responsible. They have not historically worked well together. And there's no good process. It has resulted in a lack of decisions being made that really need to be made in order to ensure there's a process in place to revoke pre-qualification status. And we have heard a lot of horror stories around situations where that status arguably should have been revoked, but because there's no agreement between the two agencies about doing that, it doesn't happen. Suspension and expulsion reports are not inclusive of all incidents because there's a lack of clarity on what are the 10 hours we're talking about. And if you leave, and if you've been asked to leave and it's not happening within those 10 hours, is that really a pre-K expulsion? And there's not alignment between the AOE and CDD on that. And, list goes on. So that represents our through the process that Jeff lined out, our articulation clearer. We have made many of these points over the last few years, but they are, I believe, clearer, more focused, more detailed, and backed up by the experience from the field that we need to really counter the other narrative out there, which is everything's fine, we just need more money. So we have taken these statements. Each of the organizations have gone to their boards. We are the last board to talk about this. We had a meeting with Dan French and shared these problem statements. We had a meeting with the NEA last week and reviewed these with them, and they are on board with sort of joining us in whatever our advocacy looks like this session. We met with Kate Webb
Yesterday, day before.
earlier this week, who's presumed to be the new chair of the House Education Committee. We did not review the problem statements, I don't believe, but we talked generally. And her signal seemed to be, well, I don't really want to deal with pre-K this session because there's some reports that we're going to be getting, and we should just, again, let's just wait and see what the reports and the data say. So I think I'd just like to turn it back to you all, and Jay in particular. I think your organization has actually taken a pretty solid position on what we should do about pre-K.
So and also, though, to add to, in terms of Kate Webb, one of the things she did say to us yesterday that had already been, or the day before, that had already been signaled to us was that, from Secretary French, was that he plans on taking the lead at the AOE level on this issue. What that'll actually end up looking like, we'll see, but he understands. He'd come in earlier and told us that he thought he was going to let it set for a year and take a look at it, and he realizes it's dysfunctional, it's not efficient, not effective. So hopefully we'll have some movement there at the AOE level to try to address this. The Vermont Principals Association, we've come out with a goal and a position that all 4-year-olds should be in pre-kindergarten. Or not necessarily be in pre-kindergarten, but be offered the opportunity to be in pre-kindergarten, just like kindergarten. So our position is that 4-year-olds should be, every school should have programs for 4-year-olds. And that's something that we think should be phased in over the next couple of years. And we're really basically saying, cut it off between, you have your 0 to 3, run by CDD, and let us take 4-year-olds through and have high-quality programs offered at schools for 4-year-olds with matching ADM. So if the Anytown Elementary School district wants to run a preschool program, full-day program, then they get the same ADM as they would for any other full-day child. And then we can assure that all of our 4-year-olds have access to high-quality programming. So the Principals Association has come out with that statement. We're going to push for that.
Full day?
Well, we're pushing for the ability to have full day, but as you pointed out, if a parent, just like kindergarten, if a parent wants to only have a take a half day or not go at all, that's their choice, that's their call. And sometimes parents will do that because they have lots of other opportunities to provide their kids with the support that they need, which is absolutely fine.
Correct.
But for parents that don't have that opportunity, by making it a full day option, by providing busing, we can make sure that the kids that need it the most have the opportunity to get it. And our fear right now, and talking to principals, a lot of times the kids that need it the most are the ones that are not getting it at all. And they're walking into kindergarten, completely dysregulated, already 2-3 years behind academically, and even more further behind in terms of social, economic issues and issues around trauma. So by having the kids there earlier, we're hoping that we can give them the regulation skills that they need, the social, emotional learning support that they need so that they can be successful learners and bring them into the system earlier. So
Because then you end up with kids, because I was a special educator, you end up with kids at 7th grade who are reading at a 2nd grade level. And then you're told you got to get this kid up to an 8th grade level because that's what he has to be at. So you have 5 years to work on a 2nd to 8th grade level. And, when they've already come in and they've already decided they can't do it. That's their biggest challenge, is to convince them that, we're going to get you up there.
If we can get every kid in the state of Vermont to be an independent reader by the end of 3rd grade, 90% of our problems academically are gone. 90% of our special ed needs are gone. So it's so important that we make sure we not invest in gimmicks like 10 hours a week and there'll be a licensed teacher in the coffee room once in a while, in a private providers area. We need them to have high quality instruction, first year instruction. That needs to come from a certified licensed teacher.
Has anybody run any numbers on what kind of money you're talking about to make this happen?
Well, if you figure, but if you figure 6,000 kids, times the full ADM, it'd be, the way I look at it is we had 127,000 kids in 1997, and now we get 80,000 kids through counties. We've got room in our schools to do this, and we're already spending money.
So a lot of the
through
fixed
voucher.
costs we're going to have anyway, so that's not it.
That's
Right.
$6.6 million in the ed fund.
Yeah, that's right, we can use that for it. I mean, that'd go a long way towards it.
Yeah, I think we got, if we have any comments or questions, we need to be fairly judicious about it because we're running into supper. And I don't miss many meals, as you can notice, so we'll be judicious about it, but we will give a chance to have input here. Dan?
Just a couple of things that I would like to ask the VSBA and the 3 organizations to think about, because a lot of what you're doing now is you're saying, well, there are problems with the report as it is, but as we go forward, our school has just started a 3 to 5 pre-K, and we have a full day for 3 days of the week. A couple of things I would love to see advocated for would be reinforcing the ability of the local public schools to run these programs in their own individual ways so that they match the needs of the small rural communities. And the second one is continue to support vouchers within the public school system so that if a kid lives right on the boundary between one town and another, they could go to a different school for pre-K where it's easier for the parents to get them. There's a couple of things that, looking forward, sort of with a positive attitude, that I would like to see included in this.
Thank you, Dan.
Anyone else have some points they want to make? Yes?
We're in the trenches of trying to open a full-day pre-K program for 4-year-olds, and looking at the proposed legislation last year, I'm very much in agreement of the Principals Association. It makes it much easier if you're going to get the ADM. The only other thing that would make it easier is we don't have to wait 2 years on the lag, because it's really going to hit our tax rate quite a lot to bring in the teacher, the para, create the facility for 4-year-olds, deal with the Agency of Human Services. It's our principals, going to have a heart attack.
That's a whole other area that we need to.
And then the tax rate, so there's the ADM would be very helpful if there's some way for people implementing those programs to not kill the tax rate. It would be some creative way to do that.
I think part of the goal of defining pre-kindergarten as a public school offering would be to eliminate the CDD regulation.
That would be the idea. You wouldn't have to move your light switch 6 inches, tell your principal.
That would be fabulous. Yeah.
So,
Anybody else? Neil?
Can we get a copy of the problem statements or not?
So we're trying to keep them tight to our vest for the moment, which is why it wasn't in your packet. I'm happy to share.
That probably answers my next question was, is there anything that you would like us to do at this point?
Not at this point in time. What I'm looking for from the board tonight, number one, is inform you that we've been working on this. Get your general sense that, yes, you all seem like you're pointed in the right direction. Keep working together, and to the extent we want you to take a position on, for example, 4-year-olds, redefining, pre-kindergarten as 4-year-olds in public schools, then we'll bring that to you in January, and then we'll be sort of on the record, official, ready to go.
The other thing, I keep, as a special educator too, I want to advocate for the parent, because I've had so many parents who are so afraid to enter the school. They did not have a good experience in school. They're passing that on to their children, and their children use any excuse possible to not come to school. I have a stomachache today. Okay, no, you don't have to go to school. Because and I've talked with parents at length about this, and they don't like to come to IEP meetings. They don't like to come. They're petrified. They have to sit around a table with people that are dressed better than they do. They smell better than they do. And the parents have said that. I know when we walk into this room that people look down on us. They think we're stupid, and so somehow we've got to advocate for the parent and be a little less non-judgmental of them, because it's generational sometimes. They've lived this life through grandparents and great-grandparents, and they just don't know how to change. It's just easy.
Okay, yes.
If we took what the Vermont Principals Association is saying would that take care of most of these problems?
That's a great question. I think it does for 4-year-olds.
Right.
That was, I guess, my next question is,
Right.
what are we doing with the 0 to 3-year-olds? So the legislature says, at 4 years old, that's
I think you
pre-K,
gotta,
and everybody.
I think you have to start somewhere, and Jeff says all the time, and when I first got involved in this, I was, same as Kim, I was the treasurer of the VSA, and we first started talking about this, and up in my area, it wasn't as big a deal because we only had a couple of private providers, and we were providing preschool in every school, and we were working hard to do that. But it is a real equity issue in a lot of our rural school districts and a lot of places across the state where people are not getting the access that they need. And if we can start with 4-year-olds, I mean, what I think about is Jeff talks all the time about how if we send out an email or we testify, there's 15,000 people on ELS on the other side that are saying, don't take away our private daycares, that's the most important thing. And really the most important thing for us and for you as the Vermont School Boards Association should be, what's the best thing for our kids educationally and for them moving forward in the future? And if we can get all 4-year-olds high quality programming, I think that's a huge step in the right direction.
Okay.
And I guess I would just offer that where we are struggling to have enough providers, if we were partners versus adversaries with the Building Bright Futures folks, because their focus could be 0 to 3. Exactly. Let us take on this, I don't know, because otherwise it feels as though we're at odds, where we share good intention.
I would love to see that split, and then they could oversight of 0 to 3.
Yeah.
K-12 would now become
And then that collaboration has a greater focus, and maybe they have a leadership piece there, and the collaboration to have our pre-K 4-year-old teachers know what's going on in the privates is just that much better. So it doesn't have to be adversarial to compete for those bodies when we don't have enough capacity already.
I think there are some, if you let a school district work on this with if they get some of the money. I know in our small school that we do 3 and 4-year-olds in a school program, and it works fine. They're there for 2 years, but it works, and we're finding, you don't advertise it, but we get kids on IEPs at 3-year-olds, we have them off by 2nd or 3rd grade. Now that's a big cost avoidance issue that we can take care of down the road, and so somebody argues about the cost of it. There's a cost-benefit analysis that really will work there that's available in the state that has worked. Anything else?
I just want to say real quick, I'm not sure I understand if we make the split between 5 and above and 4 and below, or 3 and below or 4. The split right now is at 5.
Yeah.
So we move it down to 4 years. Why does just moving that number provide an
don't have enough.
opportunity to do more
I was
collaboration?
just hoping that we don't have the capacity right now, and so if we, you
There,
know,
there is no split. I mean, that's the
It's
problem.
just-
There's
Ray,
there's 3 and
everybody's in charge,
4-year-olds
nobody's in charge.
are,
all over the place.
well, they're in either type of setting.
Or neither.
And overseen by both, or neither, and overseen by
No,
both
it's
sets
just
of
making the problem
agencies.
worse.
So the question is, what was talked about last year was bifurcating the system so that you have, it's a clean pre-K-12 system defined as 4 and up, and then an early care system that is overseen by AHS and has its own set of rules, but that we're not layering rules and having the different entities competing for the same bodies to meet whatever fiscal needs they
Danger is
have.
it makes too much good sense.
From the discussion I've heard
You're right.
tonight here on this in the presentation, I don't hear any objection to moving forward with this, supporting these proposals, as a board. Anyone object to that?
No.
If not, have supper.
Did you say we're gonna, in January, we might talk about adopting what the
If we're gonna take a formal policy, I mean, I think we're gonna continue to work with the NEA, with the agency, and figure out sort of where the space is to go in. But it may be, I didn't want to bring a proposal to you all tonight when it's the first time you've had a chance to talk about it.
Okay?
Thank you.
It is pretty concerning that you're gonna have a blue ribbon.
I think that time we paid the registration fee and there was a little bit of money we split up so that people could get something back for their travel and their hotel, depending on whether you want to, if you want to attend, because it's in this end of the country instead of San Antonio, Texas. It's Philadelphia is drivable from here without.
Amtrak's really good too. I've been to Philly on Amtrak.
So, but you could look into seeing how you wanted to get there. I'm sure there are other hotels that probably, other than the headquarters hotel, that might very well be more economical. But next month, we'll take a poll on who's interested in going so we know about numbers and what we might be able to do.
I think it might be good if you think you might be interested in going, or you're pretty sure you're interested in going, if you could email me and let me know, that way we can crunch some numbers ahead of time so we can let you know what the economic impact of that decision may be. So all things being equal, if you're interested in going, it is a great event. I don't remember, it's something like 7,000 school board members from around, it might be even more than that, from around the country. It's a lot. And usually some great keynote speakers. I believe they have announced a couple of the keynotes, and good workshops. Sir Ken Robinson and Johnny C. Taylor Jr., who is the president and CEO of the Society for Human Resource Management. It's a worthwhile event if you can take the time to go. And we always have a pretty good time too.
What else did I want to mention here?
Do you think, Nicole, when you send out the package next time around and ask us to respond about attending this meeting in January, you could remind us to let me
If you
know.
haven't let me know already, yep.
Oh, well, that's something we need to look at. All our regions were supposed to send out introductions on what's going on in their region, introducing themselves to the thing.
That's happening a little bit later.
Where do we have that? Oh, all right.
Is that good then?
Very good.
Okay.
I glanced at it, didn't see that one, and I said, let's take care of that now. Is everybody back from lunch? So let's move on to the next item on the agenda, VSBA resolutions and the 2019 legislative session.
So this is really an opportunity to refresh your collective memories about the resolutions that were recently adopted in October that relate to, so there were a few resolutions that direct the VSBA to do things like create new regions, appoint an Act 11 bargaining commission, check, you've done that. So these three in particular impact work that we would do in the General Assembly. And then I included a host of other relevant resolutions that I have relied upon pretty frequently, and I also referenced our pre-K resolution in this letter. So I wanted to give you all an opportunity to, if there are other issues that are, so we do not, some organizations adopt a new slate of resolutions every year. We have some resolutions that have been on the books for several years, so just wanted to give folks an opportunity. If you were thinking that we were going to be working on an issue this year that's not covered here, now's the time to bring that up so we can take that on, you can talk about it as a board. We have about 20 minutes on the agenda for this discussion. Gio and I met with Jeff Francis earlier this week on the White River Union School District resolution, which was asking for the General Assembly to look at the process for, or the laws governing supervisor union board structure, where we briefed Jeff on the fact that this is a resolution that we're going to be working on this session. Want to make sure the Superintendent's Association is aware of the issue and the challenges that we think exist with the current. We talked about some possible statutory approaches to resolve the issues, and decided that the next step would be to discuss this with the Secretary of Education. So we have a meeting with him tomorrow. We have a standing meeting with the Secretary on a monthly basis. So I'm going to bring this up. Then, in my view, the best vehicle to address this issue is through, I believe the agency is preparing to present some technical changes to Title 16 to reflect the new world of unified union school districts that we're in. So under current structure of Title 16, there's like 3 provisions that apply to unified union school districts, and the rest apply to union school districts, which was reflective of the time when the laws were written, which were primarily the creation of union high school districts where member elementary districts still existed, and we're increasingly moving away where that is less the norm and more the norm are the unified union school districts, and the statutes are really insufficient, or there's confusion. So I believe they're preparing some legislation on to sort of change the statutes to reflect the direction we're in, and we believe this change fits into that category. That as we have supervisory unions that have districts, some of which are much larger than others, there needs to be a way to account for some measure of proportionality within that system that does not exist right now. We have the White River example was shared, I think, as part of the resolutions committee process. I've talked to other board members from your SU, I believe, where the largest district in the SU has the same number of board seats as the smallest district, and there's this real sense of that not being fair.
We went from 9 votes to 3.
Yeah, we went from having 9 votes to having 3 votes.
Yeah, that was similar. Our merger was not going to happen unless we could maintain the same number on the SU board.
Right, and there are some places where they were able to work that out.
Waiver.
Yeah, there are some places that were able to work that out. And there are other places where, because you don't have the majority and other people aren't being sensible, you're stuck because you don't have the votes. And so the way the law is, if the SU board doesn't ask for a waiver, then the default is you operate a school, you get 3 seats on the board. Doesn't matter how big your school is, or the fact that you went from 9.
District, right.
If your district operates a school, no, you have to operate a school because you have districts that.
At least once.
At least one school. So if you don't operate a school, then you have 1 seat. So that's the update on my end. The other 2 resolutions that were passed, I think really are more of a, we have to wait for the session to get underway in order to continue to make the point that you don't change the funding formula after we've already passed our budgets. That's not a new talking point for me. It's nice to have it in a resolution because it gives me a little bit more, but and then the other resolution, we have brought the consideration of the costs associated with providing social services to the ratios task force. I can provide you with an update on the ratios task force if we have time to do that. But I think I'll wait and see if anybody else had other issues. If you've looked at the resolutions, other issues that are not reflected here, they're like, oh gosh, I was really hoping you guys would do gun safety zones or what. There's a resolution on gun safety zones that we haven't taken up because the gun lobby's been difficult.
Neil?
So this isn't, this is one that's actually included in here, but I just wanted to check. So under the cost containment stuff that we had done last year, there was one item that in particular focused on establishing standards for fact finding.
Yeah.
We had legislation, I think, or a bill teed up last year that just never got any traction. And I was hoping that maybe it could, what the prospects were for maybe it getting traction in January.
Less than they were last year. So, the Democrats picked up quite a few seats. The NEA was the largest PAC that contributed to elections in 2008, the Vermont elections in 2018. Could talk to our friend Martin Lalonde. He's been the only one so far that's been really willing to stick his neck out on this issue.
I think it would be, I mean, if we thought we could get something passed with
Personally, I have done a lot of work with the NEA over the last 4 or 5 months. We are meeting with them regularly as a group, which we had not done for many years. And our consensus is we're getting our butts kicked by certain constituency groups because we're not working together. And so what we're going to try this time around is working together. So that doesn't foreclose if we've got an opportunity to push fact finding. They're going to pursue stuff I'm sure that we don't like. But because we're going to be doing statewide bargaining, I am reluctant to light a fire in the legislature on that front while we're also trying to manage that process because it is all consuming to go up if we're serious about it. And if we're not serious about it, then it seems like we would diminish a lot of goodwill that's been built up for no gain. But I take my direction from you guys, so if you say, stop playing nice and get to work, I'll do it.
No, that's fine, but when you tell us that the chances are slim to none, maybe we ought to be expending our effort someplace that might be more productive. I would love that thing to be approved, but you got to trade something for it.
Is there any chance, Nicole, that any part of sort of the the law that is the statewide bargaining on healthcare has within it, binding arbitration, right? So are there guidelines around how that should be informed by fact finding, and perhaps if that is done in an equitable way, maybe then it has some transferability in a non-election year?
So there are standards for the arbitrator. I do not think they're strong enough. I tried to get them strengthened. The administration, frankly, dropped the ball on that. That was,
So are they useless, or is there some improvement?
I believe there are standards. So that's an improvement. Requires them to look at other, I think it requires them to look at like the state's capacity to pay for this benefit and how other public employees and similar professions. So there's some improvement, but it, like I said, we had stronger language, but nobody went to bat for us on it. We were going to bat on a lot of other things, so. So it could, that is an opportunity, I think. We'll see how the first round goes, and if it turns into a disaster, I think we can use that as clearly this process doesn't work. And these standards are insufficient, and that may then provide an opening.
Anyone else have any other pressing issues that we ought to be thinking about in terms of legislation this year?
I just make sure the stuff that sunsets gets taken care of.
Right.
Because a lot of those things that are not cleaned up with the unified union school district.
Right.
Will sunset.
Well, and the whole reason they're supposed to sunset is because they're supposed to be pulled into this thing that the AOE is doing, so.
Remember that, but should it not? There's a lot of little things that would be,
Right, that bill will go through a committee process, and so there'll be opportunity for us to see if there's something
I
missing.
know you mentioned it, and I've heard that Kate Weber, public chairs, House Education, right? Any sense of who else will be back there? We should.
Emily Long is not going to be back there.
Right.
Emily Long is not going to be back
No.
there. That's a loss.
Yeah. So my plan, unless you all tell me it's a terrible idea, is to invite the chairs of the House and Senate Education Committee to join us in January. Couldn't do that this time because they haven't been announced yet. But Kate Webb, who's a representative from Shelburne, who was on the committee for the previous 2 years, has been making the case for her, has been the only one that's really put her hat in the ring. Emily Long opted to pursue a leadership position. So that is a huge loss for us on the committee. I was hoping she'd be chair, but she had other plans, and good for her. So I think it's going to be a new committee. I think there's going to be a very steep learning curve. And I think they're going to rely a lot on our associations to inform their process.
do you have little things that are like low-hanging fruit that make them successful that we can help them do well and do early rather than big overhauls?
I believe they're going to talk about Act 46.
Piece of cake, why wouldn't they start there?
Because that is time sensitive. There will be bills brought forward, I'm sure. And so dealing with Act 46 requires a fair amount of education. So I think what is likely to happen is a lot of testimony from different, just to bring the committee up to speed on our education system in general, our funding system. I mean, it is, if we don't have a lot of veterans on that, and historically there have been school board members on that committee, and so.
Are they taking over the whole committee?
Well, the whole committee gets reappointed, right? So, and education doesn't tend to be a destination committee for people who are looking to rise through the ranks. So there are 4 openings. Typically, if you are on a committee and you want to go back, you've got a good chance, although Martin was telling me he thinks he might be off judiciary. I was like, come to education. He's like, no. But there are 4 openings on the Ways and Means Committee, and that tends to be a committee that people want to be on. So I think we're going to lose some of our better committee members to that committee. Which, it's good to have a solid Ways and Means Committee, people who understand education, for sure, because they take responsibility for funding education.
When things come out of the education committee, they have to run by there, and sometimes they get gutted by people that just
That's right. That's right.
be helpful if they had some knowledgeable people there.
Right. So is that just nod or shake your head, but one of the chairs of the committees in January to just hear what their plans are? I don't have to speak for them. They can speak for themselves and hear from you. Okay, I'll do my best.
I think that would be a good start too. At least we could be friendly with them and tell them what our concerns are.
Will there be no change in the Senate on that?
I don't believe Baruth is going to step down. I think there'll be some shifting of seats. I expect Senator Hardy from Addison County will be on the committee, and probably Senator Bray will go somewhere else. And there may be some additional. Becca Ballin may decide she needs to go somewhere else. You're a new senator?
I heard he might get.
Corey? Yeah.
Only because the other senator wants to get off. It's not, I mean, it's not a
Yeah,
choice.
yeah. People want a brief update on the ratios task force?
Yes.
Yes.
So, I am quite pleased with the work that has been done, because all that's going to come out is a data set that relies on very clear definitions that are aligned with federal definitions, but not entirely aligned. So there are some categories of staffing that are consistent with what's defined within that category for the purposes of federal reporting, so that if you wanted to do some comparisons with other states, you're actually comparing apples to apples. We also created some other subsets in order to respond to some unique Vermont questions. But it looks at ratios across, so it's SU, SD staff to student ratios, it's school staff to student ratios, it's principal to student ratios, it's special ed teacher to student ratios, it's general ed teacher to student ratios, and student support services to student ratios. And then there are, the ratios are then filtered according to how SUs rank on certain criteria. So there's a poverty filter, there's an English language learner filter, there's a size of district filter, there's a sparsity filter. So districts are ranked by population per square mile. There's a special ed population filter and an ELL filter. And then
getting a little overboard.
it's fascinating. There's all kinds of questions you can start to ask looking at it this way.
There's so many categories that, you're only going to have, one of the,
No, it's different spreadsheets. So you've got basically a database that's being built that looks at the data, cuts the data in a bunch of different ways. So if your working hypothesis is the reason our ratios are the way they are in our district is because we are a rural, sparsely populated district, well, now you can compare yourselves. It's going to be broken out in quartiles also, so you can see, yeah, that seems to be the trend in sparsely populated places. Or, we're not like but maybe it's our poverty indicator. So now we can check where we fall on poverty. And so you can start to test some of the assumptions that are being thrown around without any real basis. And that's pretty much all it's going to do. It's going to say we can't establish targets because you didn't give us enough time. What we've done is define what counts as a staff. We've excluded all contracted, all food service and transportation are out because there's some districts that contract it, some districts that, so that, those employees are not even in the universe. On the student support staff one, some districts contract the services, some districts employ, so we opted to keep them in, but there's gonna be, like, warning, do not compare, because some districts contract. So I believe, and then the report is really gonna look at state level data, but we'll include as an appendix all the spreadsheets for all the districts. So, and what we have asked the agency to do is to work with our associations around, supports for district leaders to, like, make sense of it. So all the report is going to do is really orient people to these are the definitions, these are the limitations, here's the big picture at the state level, draw your own conclusions, but be careful. And so I think it's useful and everybody around the table, I think, we were chaired, the group was chaired by Tammy Colby, who's a professor at UVM, and really kept us sort of focused on the key data questions. It was a really good statistical mind, understands, like, what's valid and what's not valid, and so I think it was we got more done than I thought we were going to get done. And I think at the end of the day, what we're going to have is we're moving away from abstract talking points that mean nothing to useful data that people can consider when they're making decisions.
Diane?
Can you go over when, where, and how it will be available?
So the report is due to the legislature. I think it's due on Friday, and we've asked for an extension. So I expect it'll be submitted in early January, if that was the goal. I'm usually, when you're on a task force and a report has been submitted with your name on it, you get a copy of it. So it'll be on the legislature's website, but I'll have a copy of it, and I'll certainly distribute it to all of you, and we're gonna figure out. I need to see what it says, because it's important to help people understand what it is they're looking at. And that's why we want the agency to help with that. Because otherwise, if you don't have an orientation to the data, you can quickly not understand what it is you're looking at, and potentially start drawing bad conclusions.
So it's gonna go to the legislature, and do you think it'll eventually be housed like on the Agency of Education website? Because sometimes a lot of those reports end up there.
Yeah, I don't think this group has our own, I don't think we have our own website, because we haven't produced a lot of documents, and we're a pretty short-lived group. So I don't know exactly what the plan is.
So those filters are not something that you can call up, it's not some sort of interactive type of report?
No, but that's what part of the discussion was. Okay. How can we build some sort of table that is more interactive? But that's not the work of this group. That's the work of the agency and our associations, sort of figuring out, like, how do we actually make this useful?
Okay.
At the local level.
All right. Kim?
Are we clear that, like, all of those categories are currently being reported in whatever way they are being reported? Like, that is data that can be pulled easily. The district should be able to pull easily. The board should be able to ask easily of their administration.
Yes.
Okay. Any other questions on the
Yay.
ratio task force?
Yes, thank you. That is.
That's good information for an update. Here's the strategic monitoring plan. Is that in here?
Yes. So I'm going to turn this, you've heard enough from me, I'm going to turn this over. We put a little bit more time on the agenda. I'll just say for Mark and Gas's benefit, this is the tool that we use to help the board monitor progress towards our strategic plan. We're in the third year of a 3-year strategic plan. we can get you copies of that if you don't have them already. I think they were last month's board packet, so you probably have it, but you don't have it. But in any event, each staff member takes responsibility for completing this report on a monthly basis based on work that we've been doing over the past month. And so I'm gonna hand it over to Susan and Sue to share what they're excited about, what they've been working on.
I will start off. I'll direct you to the page that I'll be referring to, which is at the end of the strategic plan monitoring report. It's the very last page of it. And been working on a number of different areas. The first one that I was going to talk about has to do with educational leadership and helping board members establish a clear vision for their district, and wanted to let you know that I had worked with a district, this was actually late in the summer, that needed assistance in setting goals for the coming year, and was able to help them set 3 goals for the coming year, and I'm interested to see how they proceed with that. Another area that I work on is supporting good governance and helping board members have a better understanding of their legal and ethical obligations. And I get a lot of questions either through phone call or email, especially from board chairs, on a lot of different topics. Some of the topics that have seemed to be more frequent lately have to do with there's some about board vacancies, the open meeting law, and also a lot about public comment during board meetings and how to handle that. It seems to come up very frequently. So I think my ability to help board chairs with those kind of questions is helping them to understand their the legal and ethical issues that come before them, and hopefully run their meetings a little bit better than if they didn't have access to that advice. Another area of educational leadership that I work in is developing relationships with our educational partners, such as the Agency of Education and the Vermont NEA and the Vermont Superintendents Association, Vermont Principals Association. I'm serving on the Vermont NEA's Racial Justice Task Force, which is developing a toolkit and a website for school boards and Vermont educators. You probably, if you were at our annual meeting in the fall, you probably saw the video that we watched called I Am From Here, and that was commissioned by that task force, and we're now working on more materials to provide to educators that will help them to address the issue of equity in schools. So it's helpful, I think, for that task force to have more a school board perspective. That's the perspective that I provide on the task force. Another area is working on superintendent recruitment, retention, and evaluation, and I'm working right now with 2 different SU boards on their superintendent evaluations. And we're also working on establishing job descriptions for their superintendent because they didn't have any job description. Let's see, what else have I been doing? I'm only halfway through this list. Support for good governance, part of that is our website and all of the materials that we have on our website, and especially our policy materials. So in connection with that, I developed a presentation. Some of you may have participated in it for a webinar that we had in September that was called Policy 101. And we had, I think, between 40 and 50 people that participated in that webinar. And I think it was quite helpful. And if you would like to see it, you can always go to our website, and it's on the website to look at whenever you want to. Another area that I look at in this report is whether any of what I'm doing is bringing in any revenues from program services. So I can report that it is, because the superintendent evaluations are $1,000 each, and I have 2 of those going on at the moment, and I'm working on with 6 districts on policy services. Some of them have
6 policy manuals.
Yes.
2 superintendent evaluations.
It's a much, but I will get it done. Also, I try to, as I said earlier, foster those relationships with the Agency of Education and other educational partners, and so I am serving on what's called the Committee for Protecting Students from Sexual Exploitation. This committee was created by Act 5, which was passed by the legislature and became effective in June of this year. And the committee was created to make a recommendation to the legislature about whether grooming behaviors by a school employee should be unlawful. And so this committee needs to consider that question, and if it decides that grooming behaviors should be unlawful, then it has to go on to say how should grooming be defined, whether all students are covered under this new law, and whether grooming should be a misdemeanor or a felony, and what the related punishment should be for it, and also the statute of limitations for bringing an action.
What is grooming behavior?
That's what we have to define.
Yeah, that's what, well, it's generally known as behavior that is could be seen as innocent behavior up to a certain point, but becomes something that isn't innocent, because it is the intent of it is to establish a relationship with a student so that the adult can sexually exploit that student. So,
But it goes beyond the student though, doesn't it? I mean, it also could be grooming behaviors towards the family,
it could
or,
be.
right?
Yes.
Because
So that-
then when questions come up, you've got all of these people to say, oh, no, that can't be.
Right.
Right.
Right? I
Yes,
mean-
it does. That's part of what we've just started. We've only had 2 meetings, and so most of our work right now is just figuring out what the current state of the law is in Vermont, so that we can, and then we're going to be really delving into a lot of these questions. So we're meeting every month and sometimes twice a month until September.
Is this a new thing? Is this, I mean, like, how do we know this is a problem? I personally have never run into it, and I just want to.
Well,
Yeah.
No kidding.
There's a principal in the news recently.
Yes.
Yeah, numerous teachers over the past 5-8 years that you just,
Yeah.
and it's, in the community, it'll be a person who's been a Little League coach, or a Sunday school teacher, someone that the parents say, oh yeah, that's great, you can give my child a ride to the baseball game.
So there's a host of legal issues that would
Yeah.
be triggered by this conversation that
Yeah,
we're
it's very
lucky to have
interesting.
Sue
And
at the
so-
table.
Yeah, so I'm Nicole's designee on this committee. And as to further my education on the topic, I went to a conference last week that was at the State House, and it was Preventing Child Sexual Abuse Conference. And that was quite helpful to me, because I learned a lot more about what schools currently do. I was sitting in on an afternoon session, and I learned a lot more about what schools currently do to screen employees before they hire them. So that will help inform the work that I'm doing on that committee.
I had a question from Kim.
I'm sorry.
Just
Separate but somewhat related, the behaviors outside of school, of school employees, sometimes don't find their way back to schools to become aware of situations. There's not a person who's on the registry may or may not, if they've been employed with the district,
the district may not be told if it did not happen within the schools. So I think that there's a bit of a disconnect in how schools would come to know about current employees who came up clean when they were hired, however long ago, and had an incident that was outside of the schools that resulted in something being reported at some level, some capacity. The employer is not necessarily informed, and I don't know how to close that loop, but it can be a problem. Yeah, that was talked about in the afternoon session that I was involved in, and they were talking about trying to make it a system that had better interconnectedness and communication.
Particularly if it happens somewhere else in another state. Also, the volunteers who come into the school, that can be really.
Yeah, they were even talking about parents going on field trips and doing background checks on them.
Yeah, I had to be fingerprinted.
Yep.
Yeah, they all do. But yeah, that's only been the case for the last 5 or 6 years or something.
And the other part of Act 5 that I will be involved in, I'll be working with Emily Simmons at the Agency of Education to help develop a model policy on electronic communication between school employees and students that's designed to protect the students from exploitation. So that is going to be a required policy for all school boards to have for the next school year. So we'll be working on that soon, I hope.
Okay.
I'm still not done yet.
Well,
Maybe give the
you've
update on the
you've got 3
collaborative, and
minutes,
then
and
we've got.
then Susan doesn't have to do anything.
Yeah. Sorry, we are behind
Go ahead.
schedule. That's not your fault. We're behind schedule.
But I can stop if you want.
No.
I think the
keep going.
collaborative update is important.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm also working with the Vermont Legislative Collaborative to staff the collaborative. We always hire a legislative analyst, and we have advertised the position and interviewed 3 applicants who are all very well qualified, and so we will be hiring a legislative analyst, which is a person who will be working 20 to 25 hours per week during the legislative session to help us with monitoring what's happening at the State House and reporting out to all of you.
What exactly is the legislative collaborative?
The Legislative Collaborative is the VSBA, the Vermont Superintendents Association, the Vermont Principals Association, VSBIT, the VCSEA, which
Council of
has-
Special
Council
Education
of-
Administrators.
Yes, and the Vermont School Business Officials.
VSBA.
Yeah.
VSBA. Those are all the
Okay.
organizations that we pool together to hire this legislative analyst.
Okay.
And those are the associations that our legislative report goes out to.
Yep.
And it goes out to all the legislators as well.
Yeah. It's much more effective for us to pool our resources to provide coverage and publication of the report than to have us try and go it
So the
alone. So,
reports
but the
we've got-
VSBA does derive a certain amount of revenue from that collaborative because roughly 50% of Sue's time during the legislative session is spent sort of coordinating the activities of the collaborative and supervising the legislative analyst position and ultimately writing the report. So the analyst usually provides the notes and the Sue's position writes it. So it's been a revenue generator for us. When we're testifying, we don't testify as a collaborative, we testify as individual organizations. So it's really for the purposes of coverage and reporting out to our members that we fall under that umbrella.
We got the legislative report, we know that VSBA and VSBO and everybody else is getting the same.
We all have the
That's
same
good.
information.
That's all.
Yeah.
It's a good move.
Okay?
Susan?
Okay, I'll be brief.
No,
I won't read you through.
I have just one question. Is there a person of color on the racial task force?
Yes, there are many actually, yes.
Oh, and one more, sorry. The goal is, or the indicator is revenues for the programs and services will increase, and you gave the revenues, but I don't know if that's an increase.
Well, we don't have our financial report this week, or this month. I did a rough glance. I think I said it in my, revenue for board development has been more than twice what was budgeted in the first 2 months of the fiscal year. So far on track, and part of it is the cycle, but part of it is, Sue's doing 2 evaluations, I'm doing 3. Susan's been out doing a lot of work, so our revenue on the board development side is
Are
up.
these evaluations of central office or
Superintendent evaluations.
So we do those internally, yeah? I mean, if we get requested, one of you 2 people.
We do it, yeah. That's flat, straight revenue to the organization.
Unlike searches where we.
Unlike searches where we have a consultant.
And one last, do we know how many boards set goals and do superintendent evaluations? Do we know what percentage of boards?
We do one. Doesn't everybody do a superintendent evaluation?
No, they do not.
We didn't do them for,
We have never done as many superintendent evaluations as we've done this year.
But you're not helping them put the process, you're actually doing the evaluation?
We have a tool that we work with the committee to use to run the evaluation with the superintendent, and then we provide them with a summative report.
And it can be sort of adapted to their needs.
Right, yeah, we have a starting point, and then we're flexible, within reason. Yeah, that's right, okay.
I was just gonna plug or ask a question. The equity toolkit / policy language or engagement policy language, both areas that we kind of focused and provided support for board development. Just wondering, from an accountability standpoint and policy lens.
We will give you an update on the equity toolkit at the next meeting. It's complicated.
Thank you.
We've done a lot of work, but it's not going anywhere.
Yeah. Well, I was thinking about it from the racial justice. I was thinking
Yeah, that's complicated too, so we will give you guys an update on that in detail
All right.
in January.
Susan?
I will be really brief. So the traditional board development things that we've got cooking right now, first of all, we're rebranding board development because I don't think anybody really knows what that means. So we're now going to have School Board U, and we're going to have School Board U Live and School Board U Online. The online portion is primarily the webinars, which are really doing well. We've had 4 of those first Thursdays, and the registration is up in the 60s and 70s. The next one, which is the first Thursday in January, will be the annual legislative update. So mark your calendars. And the live portion, as you know, in the past, first Harry and then me, we've gone around the state and done the essential work of Vermont school boards, and I know I did 7 locations last year, plus the webinar. And the attendance at each of those has dwindled. Gaston, you were at one. What, we have 3 people at yours? 5?
Oh, no,
5
it was
people?
more like 8.
Okay, well, I did one that had 2 people. That I remember.
Good.
And so, part of the feedback that we're getting from those is, oh, my whole board should have been here. And so, for this spring, tentatively scheduled June 1st, we're going to have a full day School Board U Live, which will be broken down into sessions on topics of import and interest for school board members, leaning toward new board members and the orientation side of things, but certainly applicable for all. We'll be bringing in guests, experts on various topics, tentatively again scheduled to happen at VSBA in the basement that we all know and love. And I'm really excited about that. And it also then frees me up to be available to individual boards. So if a board wants everybody on the board to have that essentials training, I'm there. Rather than trying to get people to come to us, which has had dwindling appeal for all the reasons. So that's sort of at the forefront. We've got a newsletter that I was supposed to hand to you tonight, but Carrie is not with us this week, so.
We're on pause on that, but there is a newsletter.
It's all written.
Well, it's all written, yeah. Just doesn't look pretty.
Right. And I'm also working on a 2019 version of the Purple Book, The Essential Work of Vermont School Boards, to refresh it and primarily to update it, new acts, new laws, different configurations, all of that, to take all of that into account. And finally, I think I mentioned this last month, January has been School Board Recognition Month, and we are pursuing that again. We anticipate having a legislative proclamation soon, well, when they start session. We will keep you advised because it would be wonderful for our board members, but all board members, many board members around the state to actually attend the reading of that and in legislature. And toward that end, I secured a sponsor this year because you all do such a it is a darn tough job. Darn Tough Socks is ponying up, and every school board member will be getting a thank you card from us. It was supposed to be next week, but again, may not be. And in that card will be a coupon with a unique code for every board member in the state, all 1,062 of you, to get yourselves a pair of darn tough socks from their website. So I'm really excited about that. I think, it's a small gesture, but I think board members will appreciate it. And to
strike that off my Christmas list.
and to broaden that a little bit, we're going to put a school board recognition toolkit on our website in the toolkit sections that will have press release templates so that superintendents can put them out to local newspapers. It will have posters people can print off and circulate around town. And I think maybe most significantly a suggestion sheet that, again, is primarily targeted towards superintendents because school board members aren't going to pat yourselves on the back, although you deserve to. And so I'm working with VSA to make sure that a link to that toolkit gets out. So we're going to have a page of suggestions and tips and ideas on ways to thank your school board, everything from having a student who writes for the high school newspaper, interview a board member, recognition on the soccer field, well, it's not soccer season, basketball court, those kinds of things, just to sort of call out board members and the hard work that you're all doing. So that's it.
Very good. Anyone have any questions for Susan? Yes.
For $10, I'm willing to write an anonymous letter to the editor for any member here. Only $10, it goes up.
Could I use my coupon?
Or a sock coupon.
Some of those socks are $37. Oh, but Neil, I don't know why, but you also just triggered another memory for me. And in January, it's my intent to get on the road and attend board meetings around the state. So my goal is 2 a month, and I am prepared to travel. I will let you know when I'm going to be in your neighborhood. If you care to join me, that would be great because we then have a united front to the whole board about VSBA. And similarly, if you either know of or are attached to any boards that you would think would benefit from a visit from us, please let me know.
We'll go to the ones that haven't paid their dues yet first.
I'm sorry,
I said we'll go to the ones that haven't paid their dues yet first.
Yeah, well, of course.
Maybe you should give them advance notice that you're going to be there in 2 weeks to see if the check.
That's right. Do we have, I have a question on, is there chairs and superintendent's training scheduled yet for this year?
So the VSA really takes the lead on that. It's tied in. It's 1 day of their 3-day conference, and so we haven't structured anything yet, but count on that for May. And
okay.
I'm pretty sure that there's a board chair focused webinar coming up also.
Okay.
And I will also be recirculating last year's video on So You Want to Run for School Board. You all remember that one.
And Susan, don't some of our other webinars, can some of them count if they do them together?
All of the webinars count for the
8
board
hours.
chair
Board
credit. According to the statute, correct me if I'm wrong, you do need to attend that with your
We're supposed
superintendent.
to be there together.
Be there
yes.
together so that you can interpret that however you'd like.
I will
Okay.
put a plug again for the idea that with unified boards, where there used to be chairs, multiple chairs from an SU, going with a superintendent, you might send the invitation to just have it invite whatever board leadership structure with the superintendent is appropriate for your SU, and cite the law that says it has to be the chair. But,
Right.
But I think that we probably have far fewer people attending per superintendent than we did when we had SU structures. And that, you know, that could be completely fine, or it could be that boards are operationally doing executive committees or something that would lend itself to learning together. So.
Thanks.
Okay. Yes.
Just curious, does VSBA or how do boards track what education your board members have attended?
We do track that.
Participated? How does that happen? And how does that get down to the chairs
So-
level, you know?
Carrie tracks all of that, so when you show up at the annual meeting, you get that cute little sheet with all your data and information, and if you read the fine print, you'll see it's checked off that you went to a regional meeting, an annual meeting, that kind of thing, attended a training. So she tracks who registers and participates in the webinars, who registers and participates in annual meetings, regional meetings, the traveling roadshow, and which boards, you know, if you're a member of a board where we've come and done training.
So follow up. So one of the things that I think perhaps is lacking is that I love your resource of the webinars, because I can put them on, I can be doing things, and that to me is very valuable. And yet, if I haven't signed up for the webinar, I do not get credit for it, when in fact, maybe you should. And I don't know if there's a mechanism for that, but
So there's no accountability structure for those 8 hours. So, I mean, it's really, and we're, you know, we haven't taken that on. I don't think we want to take it on other than from our own internal, you know, tracking in terms of knowing how many board members are participating in our offerings. But yeah, I mean, I think if it were, if there were some accountability to it, I think that's a point well made.
And of course, with the webinars, if you haven't registered and you don't attend while it's happening in real time, they're all archived. So you have access to that information regardless.
Okay, any further questions for Susan? If not, we'll, the regional representative outreach data. This is what I tried to do earlier. Last meeting, we, each county group, or each regional group broke out and said what they were proposing to do for outreach in their district. So if anyone would like to report on what they've done in their area, feel free to. I will say before we get on too far, be careful. I don't want Neil's head to get too big, but I want to thank Amy and Neil for the Windsor County one that went out. Was really a very good job, and I think if you got a hold of him, Neil might even forward that to you.
For $10.
For $10.
Well, he probably want your socks or something, but it was an excellent format that put out a lot of information that I saw a copy of that, if with your permission, maybe Nicole could put it on the website.
Well, I'll just forward it to you
Just
all.
forward it to
Yeah,
you.
that way you can copy and paste it if you want to.
Oh, because I think but any other region sent something out and had any response?
I didn't send anything out because I think my region has changed to where it's now my board. And I'm not 100% sure about that because of Caledonia Southern Essex. And so it's the Kingdom Choice District and the Kingdom East District. And that's it.
So Essex North, is that still in your?
Essex North is not me,
Oh,
it's Southern
okay.
Essex. So that's why.
So yeah.
Essex North.
Well, yes,
Right,
Kingdom
yes, so
Choice
they're not in
went-
your region anymore.
They're not in my, so I just.
That's why we need to look at the regions, Celeste.
I think that's a great idea.
Ask Louis, he'll tell you.
Yeah, I mean, it's the same thing. It's, Essex County is represented by the Canaan Board.
Right, but you guys are in the same region.
Yeah.
Right, so Cal
Right.
Central is, you can, so it's not just Kingdom East.
Yeah,
It's Cal Central also,
And St. Johnsville, let's not forget.
and St. Johnsbury. So she's
Oh,
got some
St.
other
Johnsbury
districts.
for-
Yeah. Yeah, I think Carrie cleaned it up, but you can double check with her to make sure she moved the Essex North
Okay.
numbers into the Essex North
Part, okay.
part.
Any other region like to report what they've done or what's going on?
We just need to have access to the Google Doc. I
Okay.
had emailed Carrie and probably
Okay, well,
Other things
Susan
got
dug
in
it
the
up
way.
for
Well,
Kim.
I found the Chittenden and Grand Isle one earlier today, Lori. I'll try. If I can find the Addison County, I will make sure that it is shared.
I
with you.
actually sent her a link from last year.
It's the same thing.
But Sarah doesn't have access.
Oh, so you need to.
Oh,
She just needs
grant
access.
access to
That's
Sarah.
Okay, oh, can you send Sarah
I
a link?
can't give
Because
her access.
Carrie
I can't
has
give her a shared access.
administers
Carrie
the-
has to do it.
Okay, well,
From her,
okay.
right?
But you, if you can get into Carrie's
So it's
system.
one of those snafus.
The what?
If I can find it.
Yeah, but it's restricted to the person it got sent to. You can't change
And
it.
Mark, you probably don't have your shared screen. Okay, so.
You don't have the link from last year?
Did it today.
I reminded
Yeah.
Hasn't changed. It's the same
Okay.
time. I reminded.
Perfect.
Anybody else that wants to report about that? It's important that we get this outreach done. It really
So here's
is.
what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna forward Neil's email to you all as a nice sample. If you do not have access to your Google Drive with your email addresses for your region, reply to that email and let me know I need access, and Susan will take care of it.
But know that if you have a link from last year, it's still good. Carrie updates those Google spreadsheets as she gets new information on new board members and takes out
So we have
bygone
some
board
new
members.
folks that,
So if you have a link from before, it should still work for you.
Rutland County is just, Adrian just sent it back to me. I have to look at it and then we're done to send it out.
awesome.
Yeah, because both, you wouldn't have it, neither would Andrea or Audrey. Yeah.
Adrian.
Adrian,
Yeah.
because neither one of them were on with the time it came out last year. Ken and I have it,
Oh, okay,
but I can't forward it. If I forward it to you, it wouldn't be any good to you.
okay. So okay, thank you, Susan.
All right. Any other region in that same boat? Okay. Act 11, bargaining data request.
So this is really just so you all know, I know there's a lot of angry business managers out there these days because of a lot of different things, some of which we'll talk about in a few minutes. But we've added to their burden, so I just wanted you all to be aware. This memo may not look like a lot, but it was the result of 4 months of negotiations and work with the NEA to get a data request that we could all agree on, that attorneys signed off on, and that we could then build a spreadsheet to collect information. So I am very, I think it is going to serve the process well to have a common set of data that both parties are using so that we can focus on developing proposals rather than defending numbers or arguing over numbers. We have signed an agreement with Chloe Wexler, who is a fiscal nerd at the Joint Fiscal Office. She, working for the Joint Fiscal Office last year, collected data from every school district contract and tried to build a database for the legislature to use when it was evaluating whether to move to statewide bargaining. And so she's very familiar with the variability and with the contract language, and really helped us think through how to structure a spreadsheet because she'd already built something similar. Her time is not joint fiscal time, so she's only like 80% at the Joint Fiscal Office, so she's independently contracting with us to do this work. Her role is solely to clean the data that we get from districts and build an aggregate master database that both sides can use. Because of some of the other pressures on business managers, we needed to delay the deadline for the request, so we're not going to get the data until mid-January. We think it's going to take 6 weeks to clean based on history. So the parties likely won't have a complete data set until March, which isn't ideal, but at least we're both waiting for it. So that's that update. Yes.
Just on that, a couple of things that came up. One, got some input from not so angry business managers, but one of the issues, the personally identifiable information and why that would actually be, is that really necessary to you could get, employee A, B, C, D instead of, actual names, and, you could still accomplish the same thing, right? But wrong.
That was not a priority in terms of information for me, but it was a priority in terms of information for the other side. It is not protected information. That's public information in terms of name and what plan you are in. Okay. Once you get to claims data, that's protected information, and we're working with Blue Cross Blue Shield on getting claims data that is protected and not personally identifiable.
Okay, so it's definitely not a HIPAA issue.
It's not a HIPAA issue. We had that vetted by...
One other thing that just came up was, it's asking information about HRAs and HSAs.
Mm-hmm.
Are districts, even after you go through the whole negotiation, are districts going to have the ability to, are they going to have the flexibility to decide on whether it's an HRA or an HSA and how it gets administered?
No.
So is there
There's no local negotiation on healthcare.
But
matters.
HSA and HRA are not the healthcare plan.
The law specifically directs the commission to bargain
So we
HRA or
could end up
HSA.
losing, I think, HSAs are so much smarter than HRAs, in my personal opinion. We have an HSA right now, and we may not have the ability to continue to provide that to our employees.
I hope that's not the outcome, but you will not have flexibility at the local level to sort of add things on or change what's bargained at the state level. Because if that's what happens, then you end up with the same type of permutations that we have.
HRA was such a mess.
Because right now, yeah.
Even the NEA is not going to be able to argue.
Yeah, I mean, I can't control your 5 representatives, but we have some very strong opinions about.
So as we look at the contract terms, is that information going to be captured for our contract database that we manage here through the VSBA?
No, because we can figure out whether we want to put it into the contract database as a PDF or something.
While negotiating, we were told not to just do nothing on healthcare. So it might be helpful.
Well, the contract database has all the contracts, so you just have to.
Could be captured from the database?
You'd have to read all the contracts.
Oh, I'm sorry, so it's not searchable in that way?
Right, I mean, you can search healthcare provisions in all contracts and have the database pull up, but it will pull up for you the narrative. And what we're building is an Excel spreadsheet that has, 80% gold CDHP.
So I guess that, I don't know.
We have not talked about what role that will play in with the database, but I think that, to me, it's not something that's going to be ready to inform your bargaining that's happening right now. But it may be a useful tool to put in there. But once the statewide benefit is set, then the statewide benefit is set, and then you're not really
I
gonna.
just thought since the date was still January, whatever, even in raw form in spreadsheets.
I do not believe I have the authority under our agreement to take the raw data and start putting it up on our, but, I mean, I don't know. That's something to think about, and to me, I actually wouldn't want to put the raw data up because the purpose of cleaning it is to make sure that it's right.
Any other questions on Act 11?
What does FLSA?
Fair Labor Standards Act.
One more time, sorry.
Fair Labor
Labor
Standards Act. So are you eligible for overtime or not? Are you a salaried employee or you're an hourly employee?
Oh, I see, got it, thank you.
Anything else? Not, statewide financial software transition. I asked a couple of business managers I know, I can't find anybody that's in favor of this,
Oh, no one is.
Well,
but
it's the law, so.
It's not the law as much as it is the contract.
So let me just frame this conversation and then you can all weigh in. So I was on the phone last time, so I couldn't tell sort of where everyone was at in terms of putting this on the agenda. So I thought before I invite somebody from the agency here or business managers or whatever, that we would at least make sure everybody's clear about what the issue is and what the background is. Because I know there are a lot of business managers that are unhappy with one aspect or another of this. And that is because the world in which they operate and the domain of which they have had control is changing. And it requires more work. It requires timelines that they have no control of and that conflict with other work they have to do, because there's a long list of reasons for people to be unhappy with the way this is unfolded. It started out, as you'll see, I've had two memos. One was from Rebecca in March last year, and the next came out in July. In March, it was a voluntary program. In July, it was a mandatory program. By July, 50% of SUs had voluntarily signed up to do this transition to a statewide shared student data management system. So there are some inequities in the state in terms of districts that have the ability to purchase and use good data management software and systems. And I believe the reason you had 50% of the state move forward is because there was an interest in accessing a shared resource system that had the technical, bells and whistles that people may need, and also had support in terms of the state being able to provide some level of technical assistance. Now that it's mandatory and it's got a pretty tight time frame, people aren't happy with what's been selected, and like I said, the time frame for doing the work. I know that VSBA had a group that worked with the agency to advise them on the selection of the vendor. The recommendation that VSBA made was not one that was selected by the Agency of Education. So there's a conflict there. And this has been, I asked Jeff Francis whether he'd be willing to come in and just talk about this issue, because it's not something that the VSBA, it's not what we get into. It's not our role to get into this type of operational dispute between business managers and the Agency of Education. And Jeff said, I'm staying out of it. It's a territorial, I can't remember the phrase he used, but some sort of like dispute that, we've got no ability to influence, and it's the law. And so he was like, I'm not going to talk about it. Just get the memos from the agency. They could speak for themselves. So, I'm aware of the fact that people aren't happy. I'm aware of the fact that this is causing a strain on business managers, and that the agency has made a decision that people in the field are not happy with. This is not unique to business managers. It happens all the time. There's a lot of school board members that aren't happy with some decisions that have been made at the state level in recent months. But, so I don't know what purpose or what role the VSBA should be playing in this dynamic, other than just you understand what's at play. But
the biggest issue from our neck of the woods is that all we, as a supervisory union board, talked with the other supervisory union that we were getting 2 schools from, 2 towns from. We talked about, we need to clean up the way that we make one chart of accounts, blah, blah. And so we did the research and made a selection of the software we were gonna use. And then in addition to creating one new district, we created, from all of those different charts of accounts, one chart of accounts in this system. Now that all takes time to develop. And what happens is the state stepped in and said, we're gonna require that you use this chart of account, this software.
The software, so the uniform
This
chart of
software.
accounts
But
is
it's
uniform.
gonna be, right, but it's gonna be into a different software.
Right.
So it's not gonna be as simple as just cut and paste.
Right.
So the problem was that we got our work done, and now we're being told we have to redo all that work. And all my business office manager was asking for was, could you delay the implementation so we can catch our breath and get one budget cycle done with the new district? Because it's all new before we have to change our,
So this
reporting
delay
system.
provision doesn't apply to you guys?
I don't know.
So if you've already assigned, if you're merging and you executed a contract before May 1st, you can delay adoption until FY '22. Of course, then you're making 2 transitions.
They would have
We're
had to have
still
already
making 2.
contracted with the software company.
Right,
Did
that
you do
we're-
that already?
yeah, we have a contract and we're still paying for it.
Right.
And we're gonna stop using it, and it's just, you know,
It's been clunky.
Oh, yeah, everything the state does is clunky.
And the rules have
Yeah.
changed along the way, so
Yeah.
so it's created some difficulties.
I haven't
course.
heard
It's actually, our
anything.
business manager, we did a transit, we've done a transition. And so, our folks know what it is. Our business manager is perfectly happy with the the software, even though it's a switch from something that we switched to recently. So like, this will probably work well, that'll be good. It's all, and we get a delay because of the merger.
Right.
But it's still that,
Right.
okay, we're just trying to, to get the uniform chart of accounts, okay, get that squared away first and then the software, but everything kind of melds into it.
Right,
Sorry.
right.
Yeah.
The whole
So-
thing's crashing down around us.
Exactly.
I think,
It's,
I think the difference,
Yeah,
it's just kind of supporting the businessman, to the
Yes.
extent you can.
Yes.
Just saying that, if it can make it easier for people.
yes.
I think what happened in our personal experience was as software, they came to us and said, we need more money, we need more staffing in the budget. This is the workload that we've got to do with these 2 and 3 changes for the same thing. And what are you gonna do? Tell the business office they can't have the help they need to do the job? So some of those cost savings that were supposed to be realized with Act 46 just got spent, not once but twice. I think that's part of the frustration for us with this new software. I think that's some of your concern. But when we even went for a contract with the one that the state we thought was going to have, and then they didn't get selected. So.
I think it's,
Yeah.
the VSBA can't do a lot, but just kind of, recognizing that there's a valid beef there.
Of
We
course,
kind
of course. I mean, believe me,
Just kinda
I go to
support
VSBA meetings. I went to their November meeting right after they had some particularly bad news being delivered by Brad, and then with Jeff Fannin talked about, and guess what we're coming here with, and it was a hostile crowd, and we took it in stride because we understand that there's a lot right now. So I'm not trying to dismiss the issues or the frustration in any way. I guess what my question is this a space for the VSBA to enter into?
I'm trying to get Clark's attention, but he missed that part of it. It's okay. He doesn't look at you and I over here.
We just have to make noise.
grumpy old man.
Yes.
Just make noise.
Well, Dawn,
No, it's all right, I'm patient.
no, okay,
I'll-
sorry.
Okay. No,
Okay, it is a board issue though, because our financial office is looking to bring on an extra body to manage all these changes. So it's affecting our bottom line and so it is definitely affecting our board as we as we said yes to that at the SU level, and now our contribution's up $20,000 to our SU this year for these extra positions. So it very much is affecting our tax rate and what we can offer in our schools. So.
Most of the people, though, I think, believe that Act 46 was not going to save money. At least that's what we heard, because I was on the Act 46, and I went to all the meetings, and I'm the one that took notes from the community. And I'll tell you, if I went back and looked at it, most of the community said, well, that's very nice, but we know what usually happens. So I don't think that there's a lot of people out there that really feel that. They kind of know that education just keeps going up. That's just the way.
Well, it bent the cost curve in some places. It has. Our budgets for this year are down, but you were next.
I think Don was actually.
Then we're gonna come right up
Okay,
through.
thank you. Thank you. So I heard that there were some pilot folks, Burlington School District, were doing this new piece of software, and they abandoned the pilot because it was such a mess. They couldn't use the software. I don't have a problem with this legislation. I have a problem with its implementation. It's wrong that we're headed down the same path as the Health Connect. We're gonna pay a vendor a crap load of money to do this, and it's so far it's not working. And they wanna do it by July 1st, 2020.
I don't know about Burlington, but Essex Westford is a pilot, and as far as I know, we're doing it.
You're still doing it.
Yeah.
And it's not quite the same as Vermont Health Connect, because it's not a building of software, it's an off-the-shelf product.
But, okay, that no one in Vermont has ever used.
And I will say, we were a district that had adopted, we had 2 SUs, 2 entirely different systems. We adopted the one that most schools in the state were using, and then
Then they changed it.
then it changed. But getting to a single set of line items from the 2 SUs was the biggest body of work. So I think that was so hard, that not that this transition is nothing, because I'm sure it's, people wringing their hands in our business office, but we at least had a single name for things this time around. It would have been nice to skip that stuff in the middle, so we could have gone directly to whatever it was they were doing. But that is why we jumped on the pilot early, for the support that was available through the pilot. And as far as I know, it's happening.
Still.
And it might be the resilience from the first round that has us managing this maybe differently than Burlington was able to do
There's
last.
probably some information out there that could be helpful for all of us, just for general information.
I wondered if
I
we
think
could
those
gather
are-
some information
Yeah, I
on
was
how
gonna say,
this-
those, not at the board level, but those who are in the pilot, the business
Yeah.
managers and COOs,
Yeah.
I think are communicating with one another through the pilot effort, so I don't know. But I can check in to see if that's happening, going back through the business officers to share.
Well, I would like to
experiences.
suggest that, so as we mentioned earlier, VSBA is a member of our legislative collaborative, and we share issues. We just had a meeting last week. VSBA rep did not bring this up as an issue that VSBA wanted to address legislatively, but it's definitely possible for, I think it's a good, to build off of your point, Christina, to the extent that this transition is adding costs at the local level, that's information that VSBA can provide to the collaborative, so that when we start talking education finance and pressures, we can have that be a part of the mix and talk about it that way, rather than a dispute over whether or not the agency went through the right process in selecting a vendor.
I also think, well, I'd like to
Okay.
know how the pilot program.
Don?
No,
Sorry, Don.
I'm a very patient man. Like this legislature. If you wait long enough, somebody will solve it for you. All I want to say, this is a personal opinion. I think this is a wonderful issue to talk internally, hear the war stories, bat it around, see if I have a solution. But I, for one, I don't want anybody from the agency or VSBA here talking about it. That's not our role, and all it's gonna be is a pissing contest or tinkle contest, if you know Nancy Pelosi. So that's where I'm at. And if everybody else wants it, then I'll sit here and be quiet. I don't think that's in our domain. I think, but it's fun to talk about these things. It's a good easy.
I think that the one issue that was brought up that affects us is where it's affecting our budget.
But
that's
those
an
two
issue.
people- Those two groups aren't gonna solve it.
But we can't do anything about that,
That's right.
all right? Or much other than complain. All right? Anything else on this issue?
I was just gonna say, I don't know about the staffing, if that's a long-term problem or if it's just a transition problem. And that, I think, would matter, whether or not it's increasing the cost at a central office or a transitional cost of going to this system. And that may be.
From the pilot, we ought to be able to find that out.
Right.
That would be good information for us on budgeting.
The input from our people, it's just a transition.
That's what I imagine, so I just not sure it's like.
Okay, now
But it's a lot of
It's
time and
not,
effort,
right.
that's a real cost.
we need to appoint the representative from Orleans, Northern Essex region to the board. What's the pleasure of the board?
I wanna nominate Mr. Bathlon, since I know the Bathlons, I don't know him, but they're all good people.
I know how it is.
Is there a second to
I'll
that?
second that.
Seconded by Don Collins and, motion made by Don Collins and seconded by Celeste Giroux. Is there any discussion or questions? If not, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion carried, so declared. Welcome aboard.
Thank you.
All right. We have the consent agenda. The consent agenda is the November minutes in your packet. And move to adopt the minutes by Don and seconded by Dan. Any discussion or questions on the minutes?
I was
Yes.
there. I was there. I was here. But I'm not on the list.
You're not on the list.
Yes.
So you are
Lori.
Lori
Addison.
Addison? Because we're taking these, this is a tape of the meeting. We need to get the
To Carrie.
stuff available.
Terry's
Gary.
never gonna wanna come back.
I know.
The camera's not running tonight, I don't think.
Yeah, oh, no, it's not, no.
So,
We have the tape.
so we have a tape. All right,
I also was here, I wasn't really.
you were also here in
Hey, oh my goodness.
Addison doesn't exist.
Addison was both
Yeah,
on the,
Sarah McLean and Lori Childers are missing from the minutes.
okay, any other omissions to the minutes?
Since you made some changes, I know I'm not a board member, but I just did notice this, that, I think it says they happened at the VSBA conference room.
Right, I noticed that same thing, yeah, I was
Yeah.
thinking, has that changed? Yeah.
The what?
Oh, the VSBA
Location.
conference
Yeah.
room.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, up on the top.
That's from our retreat.
Yeah.
It's been a while.
Lord knows how many minutes we've approved that took place in another location.
Okay,
Thank
that
you,
was
Sue.
left over from the June retreat meeting. That's where that was. It was at the conference room. So we've been approving that ever since, probably. All right, any other discussion on the minutes or comments? Not all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried, so declare it. All right, we have, that's the consent agenda, new business. You have your 2 minutes right now, Dan, but it's just 2.
Okay, I apologize for coming in so late on this. I had asked Clarence if I could bring a motion before the board tonight. Nicole, you mentioned Act 46. We are going to be facing Act 46 big time coming up because of the lawsuit and because a number of legislators are going to be asking that it come before the legislature. Can I pass around this motion and have people just look at it? I'll read off the motion.
Well,
Can we vote on it?
No, the motion, if you bring the issue up, we'll put it on the new one. It'll give it to us. We'll send it out with a packet next month so everybody will get a chance to see it ahead of time
All right.
before they come to the meetings to take action on it as an action item, because we have a minute left in the meeting and it's not fair to everybody to read it and especially the new members that might have questions about it. If that's
You
agreeable.
can, I think you can pass it out.
You can pass it out.
We'll
Do it
take
that
a
way?
copy and include it
It'll
in the
be
packet
included
as
on the
well.
next one then, yeah. So this gives you
Gives you an idea
an
what,
idea where I'm headed with this.
okay?
These are the same.
They're all the same, yes, they are. Yeah, there's 15 copies, so, but I'll make sure that these are available for whoever doesn't get one here tonight.
Well, they'll go out in the packet.
I can just go right in.
Okay.
Very good. Scan it, send it electronically.
Yes, we will do that, but
Okay?
it'll be in the packet next month.
And I thank you for being willing to read it through.
At this point,
Can I just say
Yes.
for the new folks, under new business, this is the opportunity to raise issues that you would like to have discussed at a future meeting. The practice is generally, to sort of look around the room and see if there's a nodding of the head. So just because you ask for something doesn't necessarily mean it goes on the agenda, but we do look for a general sense of the room. I think given Dan's proposal, he's correct in that Act 46 is likely to come before the legislature, so it's important that the board have some discussion about it in January, and so that will be part of that mix.
Nicole, for new members, there's usually a travel voucher. You don't get any money to come here, you get pizza or a dinner, but you do get a travel voucher.
yes.
Yeah, so it should have been out on the table.
They are out there?
Yeah.
You need to pick one up when you think and fill it out.
Sylvester, can we pass them up your way?
Yeah, I usually, if we could just pass them to the end of the table to Mark,
Or Mark? You can
just
have them.
pile them up there, the same with
Yeah.
your name tags.
This is
It
gonna
makes it a lot
be,
easier.
Carrie's gonna use some of this for attendance purposes too, I'm sure. The pay vouchers. Therefore, but at this time, I would like to entertain a motion from someone.
I entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn, is there a second?
Oh, I will second that.
Seconded by Celeste.
Tired since I got here.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion carried, so declare it. At 8:01.
Look at that.
Look at that.